had always envisioned my wedding day to be magical. Like every little girl, I fantasized about the dress, the flowers, and, most importantly, the moment my dad would walk me down the aisle. For years, I pictured him standing tall, proud, and smiling as we walked together toward my future. That moment was supposed to be the culmination of everything, a symbol of my father's love and support for me as I began a new chapter in my life. But, as the big day approached, reality didn't match the dream. My name is Sarah, and I've always been close to my family. At least I used to be. My relationship with my dad, however, has been strained ever since my parents divorced when I was 16. The years that followed were a series of misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and long silences. My father, once a constant presence in my life, had become a shadow of the man I had once known. We rarely spoke, and when we did, it was as though we were both strangers trying to bridge a gap that only seemed to widen with time. Tried. I really did. I reached out, invited him to family events, called him on holidays, and even texted him just to check in. But the conversations always felt forced. He was distant, uninterested, and emotionally unavailable. It hurt, but after a while I stopped trying as hard. I realized that the relationship I had wanted with my father was simply not going to happen. Now, at 28 years old, I was getting married to someone who loved me unconditionally. My fiancé, Tom, was everything I needed in a partner: compassionate, understanding, and most importantly, he always made me feel like I was enough. But despite everything I had in my life, one thing still weighed heavily on me: my father. The thought of him not being involved in my wedding day made me feel incomplete. I had dreamed of him walking me down the aisle, something every father does for their daughter, right? It wasn't just tradition. It was my vision, my dream. I had mentioned it to him a few times, subtly at first, hoping he would offer his support without me having to ask. But when it became clear that he wasn't going to take the initiative, I nervously broached the subject directly. "Dad," I said, sitting across from him at the dinner table one evening, "Tom and I are finalizing the wedding plans, and I was wondering if you would walk me down the aisle." There was a long pause. He looked at me, almost blankly, as though he had never heard the question before. He cleared his throat before responding, his voice distant as it always was. "I don't know, Sarah. I've got a lot on my plate right now, and I don't think I'm in the best place to do that." I felt the sting of his words, but I tried to swallow it down. "Dad, it's important to me. This is a big moment in my life, and I just want you to be there for me." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking away. "I'm just not sure I can do it. I'll be there at the wedding, but walking you down the aisle? That's a lot." I tried to push back, but the conversation fizzled out, and the disappointment in my chest grew heavier. I didn't know what I had expected, but I had hoped that, for once, he would make an exception. He didn't. As the wedding day neared, I could feel my excitement begin to shift into something else: sadness, frustration, and bitterness. I had always imagined that special moment with my father, but now it seemed like a fleeting dream. My mind raced, searching for another solution, another way to fill that space. It wasn't that I didn't have other people in my life. My mom was incredibly supportive, and while she had remarried a few years ago to a man named Dave, our relationship had only grown stronger. Dave was warm, kind, and unlike my father, he was always present. He had embraced me as his own daughter from the moment he entered our lives, offering unconditional support without hesitation. I had always been grateful for Dave's presence in my life, but the thought of asking him to walk me down the aisle felt strange. He wasn't my biological father, after all. I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But as the days went by, I realized that I wasn't asking for a replacement. I was asking for someone who cared enough to be there when my father couldn't. It had been almost 2 weeks since that awkward conversation with my father. As the wedding day loomed closer, I still hadn't made a final decision. In some ways, I tried to push it to the back of my mind. After all, the wedding was supposed to be about celebrating love, not dwelling on the absence of one person. But the question of who would walk me down the aisle lingered over everything. I spent one late afternoon on the phone with my mom, updating her on all the last-minute details for the wedding. We chatted about the flowers, the food, the guest list. Then, almost casually, she asked, "Have you talked to your dad about the wedding yet?" I sighed. "I've tried. He's not really in the mood to help with anything. He doesn't even want to walk me down the aisle. He says he's not in the right place for it." My mom paused for a moment. I could hear the sadness in her voice, but she didn't push. "I'm sorry, honey. I know that must hurt. But you have other people who love you, and you don't need your dad to make this day special." I appreciated her words, but they didn't erase the hollow feeling inside me. I had always been a daddy's girl, and it was hard to let go of the dream that he would be there to do this simple, yet meaningful thing for me. "Mom, I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I can't keep asking him. But I've always imagined him doing this." "I understand," she said gently. "But you know, Dave would be honored to walk you down the aisle. If that's something you want, I think it might be a good solution. He's been there for you when your dad couldn't be. He's always treated you like his own daughter." Froze. My mom's words struck a chord deep within me. Was I really ready to ask Dave to step in? On one hand, it felt like the right thing to do. Dave had been a constant in my life since my parents' divorce, and he had shown me nothing but love and acceptance. On the other hand, would it be too much? Would it feel like a betrayal to my dad? I wasn't sure, but as the decision weighed on me, one thing became clear. I had to do what felt right for me. I had spent too many years trying to please my father, trying to gain his approval. Maybe it was time to stop seeking validation from someone who had never truly given it to me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't need my father's permission to make this decision. I wanted to feel supported, loved, and valued on my wedding day. If that meant asking Dave to walk me down the aisle, then that's what I would do. Later that evening, I sat down with Tom to talk it over. "I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm stuck," I confessed, my voice heavy with uncertainty. Tom looked at me with those patient, reassuring eyes he always had. "Sarah, you don't owe your dad anything. You've tried, you've reached out, and you've given him every opportunity. But it's your wedding day. You deserve to feel loved and supported. If you want Dave to walk you down the aisle, then that's what you should do. He's been there for you when your dad couldn't be. That's what matters." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Tom was right. This was my choice, my moment, and I needed to do what would bring me peace. I made up my mind. I would ask Dave. The next day I called Dave. He answered on the first ring, always eager to talk. I could hear the warmth in his voice. "Hey, Sarah. What's up?" "Hey, Dave. I've been thinking about something and I wanted to ask you." I started, my heart racing. I was about to ask him to do something that would change everything. "Of course, anything," he replied, sounding genuinely excited. "I've been having some issues with my dad about the wedding. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to walk me down the aisle," I asked, trying to sound casual, but my nerves were getting the best of me. There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. I could almost hear Dave processing the request. Finally he responded, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, I would be honored. I've always thought of you as my daughter. I've been so proud of the woman you've become. If you want me to walk you down the aisle, I'll do it without hesitation." Tears welled up in my eyes as I heard the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a promise of support, of love. Dave wasn't my biological father, but in so many ways, he had been more of a father to me than my real dad ever had been. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Thank you so much. It means the world to me. I'm looking forward to it, Sarah. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Once I made the decision to ask Dave to walk me down the aisle, a sense of relief washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But I knew that choosing Dave over my biological father would have consequences. And they came sooner than I expected. After I spoke with Dave, I texted my dad to let him know about the wedding plans. I hesitated a little, unsure of how to phrase it, but I needed to be honest. The text was simple, direct, and to the point. "Hey, Dad, I wanted to let you know that I've asked Dave to walk me down the aisle since we've been having some trouble connecting lately. I hope you understand. I didn't expect a warm response, but I was bracing myself for something. What I didn't anticipate was the cold, almost hostile reply I received a few hours later. Are you serious? I can't believe you'd ask him instead of me. I'm your father, Sarah. Why would you do this? The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I stared at my phone, the screen blurring as a rush of conflicting emotions flooded my chest. Anger, guilt, and sadness mixed together in a cocktail of frustration. I had been trying so hard to make peace with him, to have him be part of my life again, but now it felt like every effort I had made in the past few years was completely irrelevant. I took a deep breath and replied, trying to remain calm. Dad, I love you, but I've been asking for your support for a long time, and I just don't feel like it's there. Dave has been there for me when you haven't been. I need to feel supported on this important day, and I hope you understand why I made this choice. I left my phone on the kitchen counter and walked away, not wanting to read any more of his messages. I had made my decision and it felt right to me. But a small part of me still hoped that my dad would come around, that he would see the effort I had put into trying to repair our relationship and finally step up. That hope, though, was quickly fading. The next few days were filled with silence. My dad didn't respond to my message. I didn't hear from him at all. I tried not to let it bother me, but it was impossible to ignore the nagging feeling of rejection that still lingered. I had tried to involve him, to give him the chance to be a part of my life in a meaningful way, but it was as if he had chosen to remain an outsider in my most important moment. I told my mom about the exchange, and she tried to comfort me. Sarah, you did what you needed to do. You're not responsible for his feelings. He's had plenty of time to be there for you, and now he's made his choice. But it wasn't as simple as that. I had been conditioned for so long to put my father's feelings ahead of my own, to believe that his approval was the key to my happiness. And now, with my wedding day approaching, I was faced with the harsh reality that I couldn't rely on him anymore. A week passed, and the silence from my father remained. But then, as the wedding day drew nearer, I received a phone call from him. My hands trembled as I answered the phone. Sarah, my dad's voice came through, low and strained. We need to talk. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. I know you're upset, he continued, but I want to be a part of your life. I want to be there for you. I'm your father, and I love you. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. Dad, I've been trying for years. You've never been there when I needed you. I've reached out and you've pushed me away. Can't keep doing this. I need someone who will actually show up for me. He was quiet for a moment. So that's it then. You've completely written me off. I haven't written you off, I replied, my voice trembling. But I can't keep waiting for you to change. I have to move forward with my life. And right now, Dave is the one who's been there. He's the one who supports me. I can't pretend like that doesn't matter. There was a long pause before he spoke again. His voice colder this time. I'm disappointed in you, Sarah. I'm your father. I should be the one walking you down the aisle, not him. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said softly. But this is my decision. I've made it, and I can't undo it. There was no apology, no understanding. Just silence hanging heavily between us. The conversation ended without resolution, and I was left feeling drained. It wasn't the cathartic moment I had hoped for. Instead, it was another reminder that no matter how much I wanted things to be different with my dad, the reality was that he wasn't going to be the father I needed him to be. As the wedding day approached, the tension between us remained. He hadn't reached out to apologize. He hadn't made any effort to make things right. And while part of me still wished he would, another part of me was relieved. I had made my peace with the fact that my father wasn't going to be a part of this day the way I had imagined. But Dave was. And that was enough. The morning of my wedding day arrived, and the air was thick with excitement, nerves, and a strange sense of finality. I couldn't stop smiling as I looked around at the people who were there for me, not just because of the wedding, but because they loved me and had always been by my side. The venue was everything I had imagined. A gorgeous garden with soft pastel flowers, twinkling lights, and elegant decor. Everything was perfect except for one thing: my father's absence. I had almost hoped that he would show up at the last minute, that he would have a change of heart and walk into the venue with that proud smile I had always dreamed of. But as the minutes ticked away and the ceremony time drew closer, it became clear that wasn't going to happen. I hadn't heard from him since our phone conversation, and honestly at that point, I wasn't expecting anything else. Instead, I focused on the people who were present, the ones who mattered most. My mom, who was beaming with pride, and Dave, who had been nothing short of supportive throughout this entire process. As we prepared for the ceremony, I took a moment to reflect on everything that had led to this day. I knew, deep down, that the absence of my father didn't define this moment. It wasn't about him. It was about Tom, about the love we had for each other, and about the incredible support I had from the people who truly cared for me. And that's why, when the moment finally arrived, I felt ready. I slipped into my wedding dress, and I looked at myself in the mirror. I had always imagined that moment being filled with tears and happiness, but all I felt was calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was at peace. This was my day, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. At that moment, Dave knocked gently on the door, and I turned to face him. He was already dressed in his suit, looking dapper as always, but there was something else in his expression, something that made my heart swell with gratitude. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady but full of emotion. I nodded, unable to find the words to express how grateful I was. Instead, I took his arm and we stood there for a moment, just the two of us. "I'm so glad you're doing this for me, Dave," I whispered. "You've always been there for me, and this means the world." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're my daughter, Sarah. You always have been, and I'm proud of the woman you've become." His words hit me like a wave, and I fought back tears. It was a bittersweet moment, knowing that my father wasn't there, but also knowing that I had someone who loved me enough to step in without question. The ceremony began, and I found myself walking down the aisle with Dave by my side. The guests were all standing, their eyes fixed on me as I made my way toward Tom, who was waiting at the altar. His face lit up when he saw me, and I could feel my heart race with anticipation. This was it. The moment I had waited for my entire life. As we reached the altar, I turned to face Dave. He placed my hand in Tom's, and I couldn't help but notice the emotion in his eyes. There was pride, love, and a deep sense of connection. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was the culmination of everything, of years of love, sacrifice, and support. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Tom and I exchanged vows that we had carefully written, words that captured everything we felt for each other. I looked out into the crowd, and though my father's absence weighed on me, I couldn't ignore the love and warmth that surrounded me. My mom, Dave, and all of the people who truly mattered were there, cheering me on as I began this new chapter in my life. And then, as we exchanged rings, something unexpected happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the crowd. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized my dad. He was standing alone, his hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. His face was etched with regret, but as our eyes met, there was something else, an unspoken understanding. He had come. At the last moment, after all the time we had spent apart, he had shown up. I felt a mixture of emotions flood through me: relief, anger, confusion, and strangely enough, hope. In that moment, I realized that no matter how complicated our relationship had been, no matter how much time had passed, there was still a part of me that wanted my father's approval. But as the ceremony continued, I realized something else too. His presence didn't change anything. I didn't need him to walk me down the aisle. I didn't need him to validate this moment. I had already found my peace with the people who truly mattered: Dave, my mom, Tom, and everyone who loved me unconditionally. After the ceremony, I took a moment to walk over to my dad. He stood awkwardly, as though unsure of what to say. "Dad," I said softly, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I'm glad you could make it. He nodded, his expression sincere. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you before. I'm proud of you, Sarah. I don't know how to make up for all the time I've lost. I took a deep breath, the weight of his words hitting me harder than I expected. It's okay, Dad. I've made my peace with everything. I'm happy. And I'm glad you're here today. For a moment we stood in silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And maybe that was all we needed. The reception was a whirlwind of laughter, dancing, and joy. Tom and I shared our first dance as husband and wife, and for the first time I felt like everything was exactly as it should be. I had made peace with the past, and I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. As the night wore on, I caught glimpses of my dad across the room. He was standing off to the side, watching me with a look of quiet contemplation. Part of me wanted to go over to him, to try to bridge the gap that had grown between us over the years. But I also knew that I had to let go of the idea that I could change everything in one night. This wasn't something that could be fixed over a single conversation, or even a single event. It was going to take time, and for the first time I felt like I was okay with that. I didn't need my father to walk me down the aisle to know that he still cared. I didn't need him to be perfect to see that he was trying, however imperfectly. And I didn't need to hold on to the past anymore, hoping for something that might never come. I had my own family now, with Tom, my mom, and Dave, people who had supported me through everything. In the midst of the celebration, I noticed my mom walking over to me with a smile on her face. She had been talking to my dad earlier, and though I couldn't hear their conversation, I could tell that they had made some progress. "Sarah," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. This day was everything you deserved and more." "Thanks, Mom," I said, squeezing her tightly. "I couldn't have done this without you." As the night continued, I finally found the courage to approach my dad. He was standing near the refreshment table, nursing a drink, looking somewhat lost in thought. When he saw me approaching, he gave me a small, tentative smile. "Hey, Dad," I said, walking up to him. "How are you doing?" "I'm good," he replied, his voice softer than it had been earlier. "I just wanted to say, I'm really happy for you, Sarah. I know I've made mistakes, and I probably won't ever be able to make up for them. But I'm proud of you. You've turned out to be an amazing woman." His words hit me hard, more than I expected. I had spent so much time holding on to the anger, the hurt, and the disappointment, but here he was, acknowledging everything I had been feeling. It wasn't the grand apology I had dreamed of, but it was enough. It was a step in the right direction. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice steady. "I'm glad you came today. It means a lot to me." We stood there for a few moments, just the two of us. It wasn't the picture-perfect father-daughter moment I had once imagined, but it was real, and that was enough. Maybe it was a new beginning. Maybe it wasn't. But either way, I was okay with it. After a while, I returned to Tom's side, where we laughed, danced, and celebrated our new life together. The rest of the night passed in a blur of happiness and love. I couldn't help but notice how many of my friends and family had surrounded me, offering their support and cheering me on. And in the back of my mind, I knew that no matter what happened with my father, I had everything I needed right here. The people who loved me, the man I had married, and the future that lay ahead. The next few days after the wedding were filled with honeymoon bliss, and when we returned, life slowly began to settle back into a new routine. Tom and I settled into our new home, and despite the lingering tension with my dad, I felt more at peace than I had in years. I didn't need to chase after an ideal version of what my relationship with my dad should be. I realized that the love and support I had always craved didn't have to come from one person. It could come from many, and it had. That was the lesson I carried with me long after the wedding day had passed. As the weeks turned into months, I kept in touch with my dad sporadically, but each conversation felt like a step forward. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. We were finding our own version of what a father-daughter relationship could be, and that was enough. I had chosen love over resentment, understanding over anger, and in the end, it was the best decision I could have made.